Elias Corte was 42 years old, a master electrician who had spent 20 years making other people's buildings safe and had never once been late to a job. He drove a truck that was 8 years old because he maintained the engine himself on Sunday mornings. He kept a thermos that his mother had given him, dented on one side, and he filled it before anyone else in the house was awake. That Thursday afternoon, he came home early and found his wife at the kitchen table with a folder, a pen already uncapped, and a man he half recognized leaning against the counter he had tiled himself. She slid the papers across to him and laughed. A light, relieved sound, like a woman setting down a bag she'd carried too long. She signed her name first. She was still smiling when she capped the pen. She had no idea what was sitting in a lawyer's office across town, waiting for a name that was about to become very important. She had no idea how wrong she was about the man she'd just signed away. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was ready at 5:43 in the morning. Elias knew this without looking at the clock. He had wired the machine to a timer himself, the way he wired everything in that house, with the quiet certainty of a man who believed a thing done right would hold. The kitchen was dark. The window over the sink showed a sky that hadn't decided yet whether to be morning. He poured the thermos full and screwed the lid on tight. Then he stood for a moment in the room he had built. In the silence, he had not yet learned to read. Elias had spent 12 years building a reputation in a trade where reputation was the only thing that traveled. Foremen requested him by name. When a job went wrong at 2 in the morning, his was the phone that rang. He had wired hospitals, schools, the new transit hub downtown, where 40,000 people passed under his work every day without knowing his name. He didn't need them to know it. He was the kind of man who measured twice and cut once in everything, and he had carried that habit home with him for 6 years of marriage. He had wired Renata's first salon himself over 11 weekends, pulling cable through walls on his days off so she wouldn't have to pay a contractor. He had co-signed the lease. He had written the first check. She had thanked him the way a person thanks someone for holding a door, briefly already moving past. He told himself that was just how she was. He didn't know it then, but she had been ready to leave for 14 months. She had only been waiting for the math to work in her favor. The afternoon the papers came, he had been at a job site since 6. He'd left early because a junior on his crew had finished clean, and there was nothing left for Elias to fix. The house smelled like a perfume he didn't recognize. Renata sat at the table in a dress he had never seen, and the folder in front of her was the kind lawyers used, crisp at the corners. The man by the counter was named Dorian. Elias had met him twice. He owned a string of failing wellness studios and a smile he used like a tool. "I've been carrying this marriage by myself for years," Renata said, and the sentence came out smooth, rehearsed, with the small rhythm of something set into a mirror. "I deserve a life that's actually going somewhere. I'm being honest, finally. You're a good man, Elias. You're not what I need anymore." Elias set the thermos on the counter. He didn't slam it. He didn't drop it. He set it down with the same deliberate care he gave a live panel, like a man placing a tool he intended to pick up again. "Okay," he said. She blinked. She had prepared for more. The folder had a speech behind it. He could see the shape of the speech and how she'd arranged the pen. But he didn't argue, and her relief escaped before she could hide it, and she laughed. That bright, careless laugh, because the hardest part had turned out to be nothing at all. He noticed the ring on the table. She had set it down beside the folder, the way a person sets down a receipt for something they're returning. He noticed Dorian's car keys on the counter, a fob for a car worth more than the man's businesses could honestly afford. He noticed these things the way he noticed a wiring error, not with anger, but with the quiet recognition of a man who knew what a correct connection was supposed to look like. He filed them away. He didn't decide yet what they meant. He signed where she'd marked. He capped the pen. He picked up his thermos, because it was his, and he walked out the door he had hung himself. He didn't look back at her. In the truck, he sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Then, he drove to the only place that had ever felt like it was actually his. What Elias had built over 6 years was not the marriage. He understood that now, sitting in his aunt's driveway with the engine ticking as it cooled. What he had built was a habit of giving without measuring the return, and he had given it all to a woman who had been keeping a ledger he never saw. He thought about the 11 weekends in her salon, the cable he'd pulled until his hands cramped. He thought about the double shifts he'd worked the winter her business almost failed, money he'd moved into her account without telling her because he didn't want her to feel the weight of it. He thought about the nights she stopped asking how his day had gone, the phone she'd started angling away from him at dinner, the weekends she didn't explain. He had logged each of those silences the way he logged a flickering circuit, noted, not yet diagnosed. His Aunt Della had seen all of it. She was 71, small, with silver hair she kept pinned and reading glasses on a chain. She had never trusted Renata, and she had never said so, because Della was the kind of woman who waited to be asked. She owned the house Elias parked in front of now, a tidy place that smelled of coffee and cedar, and something faintly sweet always cooling on the counter. She was the one person in his world who said his name like it weighed something. That was what Renata had never understood. Until the Thursday everything changed, Della was the only person who had been counting on his side. He didn't tell Della about the papers that night. He sat at her table and ate, because she made him, and he let the quiet of her kitchen do what the quiet of his own house never had. She watched him over her glasses. She knew the shape of a man absorbing a blow. After a while she said, "You'll want to call Walter." Walter was the lawyer who had handled Della's affairs for 30 years. Elias had met him once, at a funeral. "It's just a divorce," Elias said. "It's clean. She wants out." I signed. Della folded her hands. "Eat first," she said. "Then listen." She told him then. Not all of it. Della never gave a thing she couldn't document, but enough. His grandfather, Elias's great-uncle Tobias, had died 11 weeks earlier in a care facility 2 states away. Elias had known the man only as a name and a few photographs, a relative who'd left the family young and never come back. What Della knew, because she had kept the letters, was that Tobias had spent 50 years building something quiet and enormous. Land first. Then the mineral rights under the land. Then a holding company that owned the mineral rights and a portfolio that had grown in the patient, compounding way that money grows when no one touches it. Tobias had no children. He had spent his last year deciding who, of all the relatives who had never once written to him, had built a life worth trusting with what he'd made. "Walter is the executor," Della said. "He's been trying to reach you for 3 weeks. The letters went to the house." She paused. "I imagine your wife collected the mail." Elias set down his fork. He thought about the folder on his kitchen table, the crisp corners, the pen already uncapped. He thought about how quickly the lawyer's office must have started calling. He thought about a woman who collected the mail every afternoon and who had, in the last 3 weeks, become suddenly, decisively ready to leave. "There's more," Della said, "but it can wait until you've talked to Walter." He called the next morning at 7 Pucko. Walter's voice was even, unhurried, the voice of a man who had delivered heavy news before and knew it landed better slow. The estate, he explained, was valued at just over $600 million. The bulk of it sat in the holding company and the mineral portfolio. The rest was land, instruments, and a trust structure Tobias had spent his final year refining with a precision Elias would come to recognize as familial. There was one condition, and Walter read it aloud from the will in Tobias's own words. The estate passed to the heir, and to the heir alone, as the heir's separate property, separate, the document specified, from any marriage, any community, any claim. Tobias had watched his own brother lose everything in a divorce. He had written the wall himself, brick by brick, so that no one could take from his heir what others had taken from him. Elias asked one question: when did the will take effect? On the date of death, Walter said. 11 weeks ago. Elias thanked him and ended the call. He sat at Della's table and spread what he had on the surface in front of him: the timeline of the letters, the dates of the calls to the house, the day Renata had stopped asking about his work, the day Dorian's car had first appeared in photographs Della had been quietly taking from her porch across the street for 2 months. She set the composition notebook on the table now. Black cover, spiral bound. Date, time, location, the plate clearly visible. She had a record of everything Renata thought no one had seen. He stood over all of it the way he stood over a set of blueprints, not reading any single piece, looking at all of it together, feeling where the lines connected. The letters had come to the house. Renata had collected the mail. She could not have known the full number. Walter had kept the figures sealed. But she had known enough. She had known a lawyer was calling about an inheritance, and she had moved her timeline up to sign before anyone explained that the wall Tobias built protected Elias, and only Elias. She had married a man she'd decided was too ordinary to become anything. She had filed to leave him at the exact moment he became one of the wealthiest men in the state, and she had no idea the timing was the thing that would undo her. He could see the whole shape of it now. He didn't move fast. That was the part she had never been able to account for. She had spent 6 years deciding exactly what kind of man he was, and she had been wrong about the most important thing. She had mistaken his patience for the absence of capability. It wasn't. Patience was his most practiced skill. It was the one she'd never had a reason to watch him use. He called Walter back and asked him to do nothing publicly yet. He wanted the inheritance kept quiet through probate. He understood sequencing the way he understood a complex job. You don't pull wire before the conduit is run. You don't show the walls before the foundation can't be moved. He let the divorce proceed exactly as Renata had drafted it, signing each document on time, agreeing to everything, because everything she was asking for was based on a picture of his net worth that was already false. He retained Walter not to fight the divorce, but to make sure it closed cleanly, on her terms, with the marital assets divided as she'd demanded. The joint account, the salon lease, the car. She took it all, smiling, certain she'd won the larger game. What she didn't know was what the closing meant. The day the divorce finalized was the day the wall Tobias built became unbreakable. Separate property, established before the marriage ended, protected by a condition written specifically against people like Dorian. Elias didn't need to hide the inheritance from her forever. He only needed her to sign away her claim to a man before she understood what that man had become. Walter found the rest. There was always a financial layer under the personal one, and this was no different. While the calls about the estate were coming to the house, Renata had used a power of attorney Elias had signed 2 years earlier for a refinance that never happened, to draw $40,000 in equity against the home they jointly owned. The money had moved, in 2 installments, into an LLC. The LLC was co-owned by Dorian. It existed to keep his failing studios breathing one more quarter. She had bet his equity on her exit. Walter traced the transfers, the dates, the destination, and he filed a civil action quietly, with no press. The way you preserve a thing rather than detonate it. She thinks this is already over, Elias said. Della said nothing. She refilled his coffee. He called Renata himself near the end. His voice was even, cooperative. He told her he thought they could resolve the equity issue without it going to court, that he didn't want it ugly. She agreed before he finished the sentence. He could hear the relief she was trying to keep out of her voice and mostly failing. She thought he was offering to let it go. He ended the call and set the phone face down on Della's table. Elias arrived 40 minutes early. On any job site, the foreman who arrived last was already behind. The conference room was on the 14th floor of Walter's firm. Long table, neutral walls, nothing on them, the city laid out gray and enormous through the glass. Walter arrived at 9:40, followed by the forensic accountant, a quiet man named Okafor, who arranged 3 folders in a row and squared their edges. The room was still, the kind of still that comes before a thing, not after it. They came in together, Renata and Dorian, and that was the first signal. Renata moved through the door with the confidence of someone who believed the room was already hers. She glanced at Elias once, a quick, professional assessment, and then looked past him toward Walter, as if Elias were simply another person present. "Thank you all for coming," Walter said. "Before any discussion, there are several matters that require acknowledgement." He opened the first folder. He laid the documents down one at a time, unhurried, while Mr. Cordy was unaware, Walter said. A transaction was executed against the marital home, using a power of attorney intended for a refinance that never occurred. The amount drawn was $40,000 in 2 installments. He let the number sit. This was not authorized for that purpose. A civil action has already been filed. Okafor placed the second document on the table. Walter walked through it, voice factual, not cold, simply precise. The transfer from the equity draw, the 2 installments, the destination account, the LLC, and the name of its co-owner. He read Dorian's name from the page without inflection. Dorian's smile did something it had not done in 2 visits to Elias's home. It stopped working. Renata's expression had not changed, or rather, she had worked to keep it from changing, and that effort was visible to anyone watching closely enough. Elias was watching closely enough. Then Walter set down the 3rd folder. "There is one further matter," he said, "concerning the separate property of Mr. Corte, established by an estate that entered effect prior to the dissolution of the marriage. We disclose it now only because the equity action requires the court to understand Mr. Corte's full financial standing." He slid a single page across the table. It carried the seal of the estate, the date of death, and the figure Walter had kept sealed through every prior conversation, $604 million. Separate property, protected by the explicit language of the will from any marital claim. The silence in the room lasted 11 seconds. Elias counted them. Renata read the page twice. He watched her read it twice. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite fear. It was the specific look of a person realizing a structure they'd built was standing on the wrong foundation and had been the whole time. Her hand came up to her mouth. The bright laugh she'd had at the kitchen table was nowhere in the room. Her eyes filled, and she did not blink them clear. She had signed the divorce laughing because she thought she was leaving an ordinary man. She was crying now because the page in front of her said she had timed it perfectly wrong. "You'll want a few minutes with your attorney," Walter said. Elias stood. He gathered nothing from the table. He had brought only himself, and that had served its purpose. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Walter's hand and Okafor's. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back to Renata, and he said it quietly, only for her, not as performance, because it was meant for her. "You didn't leave me too early," he said. "You left me too late to take anything, and too soon to ever know what I'd have shared." He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. Without the equity she'd gambled, Dorian Studios closed within the season, one and then the next, and the LLC dissolved under the weight of the civil judgment that followed. He was the kind of man who needed someone else's foundation to stand on, and the foundation had been removed. Renata kept the salon, but the lease she'd been so proud of came due without the joint income behind it, and she let 2 stations go. And then, a third. The people who had answered her calls when she was leaving a successful man started letting things go to voicemail. She was not ruined in any dramatic way. She was simply smaller. She carried the weight of what she had chosen the way a person carries something they cannot set down. Not loudly, just constantly. Elias did not touch the bulk of the estate for a long time. He kept working. His crew didn't know. The foreman who requested him by name didn't know. He answered every call the same day. He gave accurate timelines and hit them. What he did, quietly, over the following year, was start a fund through Walter that paid the apprenticeship fees for first-year tradesmen who couldn't cover them, the check he wished someone had written for him at 19. His name wasn't on it. He didn't need it to be. 14 months later, he refinished the floors in Della's kitchen over 3 weekends, on his knees with a sander because she had mentioned once that they'd gone dull. He had a key to her house copied, so she'd never have to come to the door. On a cool evening in early October, he sat on her back porch with a glass of water and listened to the neighborhood settle into night. Della's voice came from the kitchen, asking if he wanted the last of the peach cobbler. The thermos sat on the railing, dented on one side, filled for the morning. He didn't think about the conference room, or the page, or the laugh. He thought about the work waiting at 6. He finished his water. He went inside and turned out the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.